Thanks, Ted. I think it's probably better I use the microphone. Sorry, I'm at the tail end of a Melbourne lurgy, so if I lose my voice, I apologise now. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back in Perth. I haven't been here for a long time, and in fact the last time I was here was in 2005, I think, when I had a residency with the Art Angels. And it's quite pertinent that I'm talking about public sculpture today because during my time then, I'd been shortlisted in Sydney for a very, very large $2 million commission, which is, anyone working in the arts here knows that that's a huge commission for Australia. And I'd been brought down to the last final two, and it was a harrowing period that gorgeous Helen Turner held my hand through. And unfortunately, I missed out. I often miss out in those public sort of domains to what I call the twisted metal effect, which is often a less sort of confronting public work where panels or councils will sit around and get nervous about my work at the last minute because they worry about what people will think. I've got some notes just to keep me on track, and I've got some slides. So I'm actually a studio-based sculptor, artist. I work with a lot of different mediums and materials. I work predominantly through the gallery and museum systems. But predominantly, over the years, my works have started entering into the public domain, and that is, I try and choose those areas as a sort of almost conceptual venue for the works. I'm not that successful through the tender system, and so I take the effort to actually seek out my public domains for the works. I've been producing artwork using primates as a central theme and inspiration for my practice for the past 25 years, resulting in a lot of exhibitions and surveys at museums, and I've worked a lot in Australia and overseas. These works often go into private collections and into the public domain. It's an evolving body of work which with research forming the basis for my continued interpretation of my subject. Through the monkey and the ape, I get to see mankind from an objective platform. And through traditional media and contemporary technologies, I've attempted to translate these ideas and experiences through my art. As environmental issues come to the forefront, my work has evolved to confront these issues through the research and pieces that I make. And more recently, I've been exploring ideas based on scientific and environmental discoveries. One research component has included working with primate taxonomists, primatologists from ANU, and working in Borneo. I work with the archives of Melbourne Museum to research these rare and endangered monkeys. For this project, I travelled through central Borneo, accompanying a scientist with my role to document the new species. The ape is our closest animal relative, and genetically we share up to 98.9% DNA with these other animals, placing us in the order of primates and firmly in the world of animals, which is something some people find quite confronting, even in this day. The image of the ape and monkey acts not as a muse for me, but rather as a vehicle to understand what it means to be human. Ideas of race, religion, society, science, language and communication, religion, belief systems and increasing urbanisation versus nature explored through my work. I studied fine arts at RMIT in Melbourne, majoring in painting, now the only medium I don't work with. I work with a wide range of mediums, materials and people with whom I research and explore ideas and the ways to present these ideas. I'm a wannabe scientist. I actually wanted to do primatology or zoology when I finished school. I failed physics. I have no idea. I don't know, it's almost like a dyslexia. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to do it. So I had an art teacher at school who pushed me into making art. I sort of didn't have any choice because I didn't have anything else to do. My subject matter always dictates my methods of production, and that's something that's very different than the way a lot of other artists work. Aesthetics are not my guiding force, it's really the subject and the research that I do in the subject. So when I'm thinking about something that I want to present or talk about in my art, I think about the best vehicle for that, so the best way of producing it, the best material. If it's photography, if it's digital, if it's sound, if it's an intervention, if it's a more formal sculpture. So I transverse a lot across all these avenues, and I'm not afraid to work with people in order to help work through those through the technical things that maybe I can't work myself. I do produce a lot of the work myself. I am a maker also. I make a lot of works through wax and hand modelling, but I also work with digital technologies as well, and have for quite a long time. I'll go through some slides in a minute and show you some of those things. For example, this is a work, it's a 3-metre sculpture that was commissioned for a private collector, an architect actually, Nando Castellides. It's for his private home, and he actually built the home around the sculpture. But that is a chimpanzee that I worked with in Antwerp many years ago in the 1990s. The chimpanzee died and was stuffed for the Brussels Museum. The taxidermist rang me and asked me to come down and see the chimp, and I found this beloved chimpanzee in a deep freezer, gutted and bound, and we took a death mask of that chimp, and I turned him into a bust. I wanted to make him into a formal sculpture as a memorial to his life and his death. I wanted to give him the respect that a lot of white people get in history, and that's what I did. So I turned him into a monolithic sculpture. As I said, I'm studio-based and exhibition-based, but I'm going to show you some slides about how some of these works have transversed into the public domain. So when I make them from my research, and then these works are sold to clients. But then sometimes I'll find a public domain where I want that work, and I push and push and push and push, and I'll find a client to donate it, or I'll find an avenue of how to get it into that public domain. As I just said before, often these works will come up and I'll be sideswiped for a bit of twisted metal. They're monolithic, they're big, and they're singular, and I see them as symbols of different elements of my research. The finger comes in my work, in the process of my work, through drawing and the sculptures, through fingerprints, and through skin texture. I've recently been doing big works using just the texture of the skin. These works, to me, are symbols of communication. I've worked in laboratories with chimpanzees who use their hands to communicate, and I've worked using sign language as well as computer systems. They're also symbols of identity and individualisation. They almost appear like limbless torsos. Those works are in private collections, but they've transferred into the public domain. This is a work that I produced actually for the Atlanta Arts Festival, where I designed it especially for gorilla babies to be playing on. So it was made out of a latex, soft inner. It had foundations so that it wouldn't get totally destroyed, but the idea was that these gorillas could destroy it. When I got it to Atlanta, the zoo got nervous because they thought it might show up the fact that it's not a natural environment, which I thought was a bit of a no-brainer. But so it got placed downtown Atlanta in an area where a lot of homeless people were. And it ended up taking on a new life, and it became a symbol for homeless people where they congregated around it and they saw it as black power. And I love that. I love that it took over this whole new meaning. And I often find with my project and these works that they do take on meaning depending on where they're placed, who's placing them and who's engaging with them. And I allow that to happen. I love the ambiguity of that and allowing these images to have their own force. I'm not afraid to place these images into the public domain, and I don't think anyone else should be. I think the public are always underestimated as to what they can cope with and what they see when they're looking at a work. My works are placed in the zoos. I have fought that over the years because I've felt it very literal and maybe a little bit too didactic for these works. But in certain circumstances, I've allowed it. This is a work that's placed at the entrance of the Adelaide Zoo, and Jane Goodall launched it, which was incredible for me because she was my childhood hero. She's an incredible environmentalist. She's also a pioneering woman in the science field. This work, I like the fact that it's placed on concrete. It's quite stark in the way it's placed, and it's sort of coming out of the ground. To me, it's almost like the rest of the body is buried underneath. This is a work that was placed, it's in Bruges, it was bought by the city of Bruges. Recently it's been taken out. It's one of the only contemporary works that are in their collection. It has a very big collection of very old bronze works. It's recently been taken off for cleaning because there was a bit of an intervention by local art students where they painted it pale pink. So it does have meaning for different people in different circumstances. A large version of it was commissioned. So this is where it hasn't been bought off the rack, so to speak. And it was commissioned 4 metres high, commissioned for RMIT in one of their new educational environments. And often these works find themselves into educational systems. I work with bronze because it's long-standing. It's going to be there in a long time. And I love the organic nature of bronze. I love making works that become bronze. So the waxes and the things that you can put your fingerprints into the wax, you can get a lot of detail of the skin texture. You can get a CNC router cutting into it. You can do a whole lot of things with that initial process. This is an example of that. This is a chimpanzee I worked with in Antwerp Zoo, and I took his handprint. And from that handprint, I then 3D digitally printed it. I made the outside of the hand, so I sculpted them out of a foam, wax, the usual processes. But I used the inner. I had a layer of high-density foam, which CNC routed that chimp's individual handprint. So it brings this individuality into the work, which can only be attacked. This is the closest I could get to that chimpanzee and the individuality of that chimp. It's now it's about 1.2 metres high. It's in Bowen Lane in RMIT, and it's used as a seat and a meeting point for people. I find that these works really reach their maximum potential and their meaning for me when there's a human interaction in them. So it's either the human touching the work or the human sitting in the work, and that's when it's actually finished. To me, that's a finished work. So when it's in the gallery, it was quite a stark sort of environment, but once it's in public and it's interacted with, that's when its conceptual nature is fulfilled. That's a very large work that I presented for the Shanghai Expo quite a few years ago. It was shortlisted but didn't get down to the bottom. It didn't get made, but I thought I'd put it in just to show scale and the potential. The bigger the better for me. And then once again it's placed into a more natural setting, which is someone's garden. So they hold all these different meanings to different people, and I love that they have their own lives like that. Most recently, I have this work placed in the Melbourne Zoo. Once again, I wanted it to be placed in the enclosure so the orangutans could climb on it. It's the foot of an orangutan, and when I first went to the zoo and proposed this work for them, the education officer was very worried and he thought it would scare the children. And I was like quite horrified because it's a zoo and it's a really exact replica of an orangutan foot. And I didn't know why he thought that an orangutan would scare children in the zoo when they're watching orangutans. But they do have this new project called Don't Palm Me Off, which is an environmental project. This environmental project is about palm oil, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. It's a passionate project that I support as well, and I spend a lot of time in Borneo, and I've seen a lot of the degradation in forests and experienced a lot of the horrors that the orangutans have gone through. So I suggested that they could use this for the children to sit in while they're giving lectures about the Don't Palm Me Off project. This is an orangutan foot. It's turned upside down like a cradle. The palm print of the foot has been CNC routed in. It's the original palm of an orangutan I worked with at Atlanta Zoo. So it's giving identity to that orangutan as well. But the children, of course, are queued up for miles to sit in this work, so they're not scared. Surprise, surprise. And it's only been in for about 6 months, and the whole sculpture now has gone golden from all the children sitting in it. Once again, I love this interaction, and it's, for the children, a great education tool. It's a great way for them to experience that connection with one of our closest animal relatives. I'll go back to my notes because I don't want to... Over the past 30 years, I've spent a great amount of time overseas working and exhibiting. I was living in Berlin in the late 80s after finishing art school, where I watched the Berlin Wall fall, and at this time I travelled extensively through the then Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc. I was looking at huge bronze and marble socialist monuments, which have come to reflect back in my works. In Berlin, I squatted and I worked in an unheated studio where I made matchstick sculptures, kid you not, to the warmth of a Bunsen burner. I exhibited the matchstick sculptures along with a magnifying glass for viewing. These works connected well with the German sense of curiosity and analysis. In the 1990s, I lived in Berlin and then Brussels, exhibiting between Europe and New York, where I was represented. I once had a photograph pulled from an exhibition in New York by an American equivalent of the Vice Squad. The photo showed a chimpanzee on estrus, which is the pink swollen bottom. And this was offensive, and so it was taken down. But it was a lesson in me understanding that images can have a lot of power and they can mean very different things to different cultures. And that's something I've taken on board when I work internationally now, always. In the late 1990s, I exhibited a series of silkscreens in Vladivostok showing a scene from the original Planet of the Apes where Charlton Heston kisses the chimp scientist Zira. It was widely regarded by the Russians as representing the infamous Gorbachev's kiss, so I let them believe that. I found that the image of the ape and the monkey is a truly international vehicle for universal discussions about the world we live in collectively. From exhibiting this ongoing project from different international platforms, I've observed the different responses it gains, and I've attempted to engage with individual communities accordingly. Since returning to Australia, I've been working most closely with Asia and most recently in Beijing. In 2007, I was part of an Australian satellite project for Shanghai Biennale. I was presenting one of my large white 3-metre chimp busts, which you saw at the beginning of the talk, which I'd planned to be attached to a ply crate in one of the Shanghai squares, channeling the socialist monuments I'd seen in the Soviet Union. Sadly, I came down with flu and had to leave several days after the other artists. And when I arrived, my sculpture had been placed in a leafy courtyard, as a well-meaning friend had decided on my behalf that it looked happier and more natural there. I still lament the lost opportunity of having this work in its rightful place and the photo opportunity, but it showed clearly how my work can transcend translations. In China, the monkey holds cultural significance, and over the past 4 years, I've been working with several projects relating to this. One has been an ongoing project with Chinese artist Shen Xiaomin. It has incorporated years of negotiation and eventuated in a performance work with both public and private significance. It involved the exploration of primal language through interpretations of the monkey through a group of brave volunteers under hypnosis. This work was a live event working with the world's most renowned American stage hypnotist Tom Silver, with whom I've worked over many years, comprising audience participation. The performance was presented to the people coming in and out of hypnosis and designed to be part of the performance. It was filmed with a 6-camera team, and edited work has been turned into a public presentation. This work is not a piece for the general public, though, and was put forward by curator Janet Fong for K11 Shopping Art Mall in Hong Kong. Despite this, an incarnation of this work was part of my exhibit at the Adelaide Biennale last year. While working on this cutting-edge performance project in Beijing, I presented another work, The Golden Monkey, in collaboration with the Opposite House Beijing. 2016 was the Chinese Zodiac's Year of the Monkey, and I approached the Opposite House, owned by the Swire Group, to join forces in presenting a project using the facade of their building in central Beijing. I approached them years in advance while on a residency in Beijing at Huantier Art City, and it took years to get the funds, the permission and the support for this project. It was a difficult project to pull off, yet it was very rewarding. I had to beg, borrow and bribe to see it happen. The work was included in the Beijing Design Week program and was supported by AsiaLink, Creative Victoria, Australia-China Council and the Australian Embassy, Beijing. I'm just going back a little bit here because this is a body of work that I started. It was a prelude to these works in Beijing. I started in 2007 when I was working in Borneo, and I was working with a scientist who I introduced to the ANU, to a primatologist there, and they wanted to research these new subspecies of monkeys that are being discovered all around the world. Due to deforestation worldwide, there's a lot of new subspecies of plants, flora and fauna being discovered. And there's this whole new epic of taxonomy going on, which sort of was really unprecedented from Darwin's sort of era. So my job was to be the modern-day recordist and to go along on this God-forbidden, God-forsaken trip down central Borneo with a couple of Penang trekkers and some homemade guns, and we're out in storms, and it was wild. It was totally channeling Survivor Borneo. But I started making these, piecing together these different visual sightings that I was hearing about of these new subspecies of monkeys. So I worked with Colin Groves from ANU and this scientist from Borneo and with other scientists and with the Melbourne Museum Archives, and we pieced together what these different monkeys' sizes and what they would look like in the round. So all these different monkeys were these newly discovered subspecies of monkeys. It's called distinct extinction. So the works that I did in Beijing come directly from that. This is a prelude to the work, and it was to see in the Year of the Monkey on the Melbourne Town Hall, channeling the French cartoonists of the 1900s, where the monkey was always, substituted for the politician or the artist. This was placed on the town hall. But it's actually relating to a new subspecies of monkey that was discovered in Yunnan province in 2011. It's called the Sneezing Snubnosed Monkey. It's a 9-metre sculpture, this one, and it was placed for White Night Melbourne. But after that, I created a bigger version of this for Beijing. It was made in Melbourne with the help of someone I work with quite regularly called Philippe Reynolds, who's an incredible sort of person who works through a lot of sort of engineering problems. He helped with the King Kong production, and he works with inflatable works predominantly. In 2011, the new subspecies of snub-nosed monkey was found in Yunnan province in southern China. Local villagers had heard sneezing coming from high in the mountains as they picked their vegetables. They thought that they were ancestors, but scientists in the area went to investigate and found what is now known as the sneezing snub-nosed monkey. The monkeys were sneezing, melting ice from their upturned noses as their high-altitude habitats are melting due to global warming. This monkey with a strange upturned nose was discovered the day after Michael Jackson died, and spiritualists in North America saw it as a sign of Michael's resurrection. That's true. Once again, another cultural difference. That shows the scale of it against a building. This is where we made it in Footscray in Melbourne. It's made out of a very lightweight metallic material, and it's inflated with a motor and placed on the facade of a building called the Opposite House Building, which is a beautiful building in central downtown Beijing. I worked for a couple of years with the director from this building, developing the ideas for this and getting the permission. It was quite a difficult scenario. Now this is where I go to the multimedia, which is, sorry. Volume up is fine. It's just a small making of the presentation of this work. Collaboration, as both the Swire group who supported it and myself had a lot to bring to the table. In the end, there was a reported from Beijing Design Week's Statistics, 20 million hits on their Beijing Design Week website. 100,000 visitors a day came through during Golden Week celebrations. And it shows the huge population of China and how these events that can navigate through their social media and into the public domain can have such resonance. We used a lot of social media websites, we used QR codes, we spent a lot of time and energy focusing on that social networking to spread the impact of this project. I had requests from China for this work to be placed on supermarket buildings, in theme parks, where I was also asked if I could do tigers. Shenzhen Biennale, it's been put forward for K11 Hong Kong. Sadly, due to very difficult customs regulations, the work had to be returned to Australia. This work's success was its relatively simple image, but with multiple layers of meaning. It received great press attention, but on the day of its big press launch, a huge wind blew through, setting off the de-inflation computer process. And all I could see during my interviews was a huge piece of gold material flapping against the side of the building. One reporter called it an empty scrotum. Sadly. At first, journalists worried me as they said they thought the monkey might not be cute enough, it might not be Chinese enough, not what the people would expect. This was a work for the people, so I was worried by these comments, but in the end the work brought people from far and wide. They were Chinese, they were expats, they were young, they were old, they were art interested and they had no interest in art. For me, it was important because it added to my ongoing project conceptually. For me, it was the newly discovered golden snub-nosed monkey channeling Michael Jackson through the urban pea soup thickness of pollution in Beijing on the side of a building celebrating the Chinese zodiac year of the monkey. Through the use of Chinese social media and QR codes, I was able to expand the viewer's experience if they wished, by adding text and background information to the work. This text engaged in the environmental issues facing this new species of monkey and the story of its discovery, along with the story of the cultural significance of this monkey within China. The work highlights expanding urbanisation, global warming, plus a cross-cultural exploration. At its simplest, this project worked because it could be enjoyed just as an unexpected sneezing golden apparition on the side of a beautiful building by Japanese architect Kenjo Kuma. After this project, I'll show you some more pictures of this work. So you have to keep in mind it's 14 metres high. And everyone working in public domain knows you have to create very large works to have any impact. It was very well placed because it had a square in front of it so all the people could congregate and it didn't upset the authorities, and that's a big problem in China. You know, you don't want to have things closed down. There are a lot of subcultural events that went along with it, such as chocolate making, which we used to bribe the monkey out of customs. It went to Chengdu and was placed on another building down there, another fantastic, spectacular building, higher up, which I think was more successful. And the gold shone through all the pea soup of all these environments. Light was essential. Scientists were essential. We had the Sneezing Snubnosed Monkey expert come up from Yunnan. And then other people had their own interventions in their cuteness. And some people even went to great extents when they came to visit the talks, making their own golden snub-nosed. When I came back to Melbourne, I went to a Chinese restaurant and I noticed the Chinese restaurant owner looked like he came from Yunnan, and I brought up this project and he ran off and got his phone and came back and he showed me this. He'd actually gone to visit the monkey. I now have been invited to do another project which I'm working on at the moment for Earth Hour Beijing next year, March 2018. It's called The Skywalker. A new gibbon was discovered this year in January. And it was discovered by a Chinese scientist who has a fascination with Luke Skywalker. So he's called it the Skywalker gibbon. As you do. I love Luke Skywalker too. So I've created, once again, another 14-metre sculpture, once again inflatable, but it's using a solar interactive material this time, so it's going to be glowing. This is working with Philippe Reynolds again. It'll be placed high up on the building. The silvery gibbon, the Skywalker gibbon, the gibbons are the only other monogamous primates other than humans, believe it or not. So the gibbons in Borneo, my experience of them, are they call to each other in the morning. The female and the male go off to forage and they call to each other. They call a love song that's really quite beautiful. I have a love call coming from this male gibbon, and it's going to be going over the rooftops of Beijing. And I'm trying to get sponsorship from the famed show, If You Were the One, which is a very occult Chinese, and they're interested, so keep tuned. Because China has a little bit of a problem with too many men, a lot of women not wanting to date, so there's a bit of a dating problem. This work is going to be powered by 50 bicycles that are attached to motors, and the bicycles will inflate and light the sculpture for Earth Hour. So it's channeling the old system of bike riding in China, which the first time I went to Beijing was what I was nearly killed by, 1 million bicycles coming at me as I was crossing the road to visit Mao's tomb. We've got an engineering feat ahead of us, but it's going to be very exciting, and it's going to be for Earth Hour. And once again, it's going to be in channeling the environmental issues that are facing the world, and I think will have resonance on a global level.